ultimately Gruen Associates, Victor Gruen being the inventor of the shopping mall. And in LA, as you see her seated on the left amidst a table full of the standard profile members of leadership of the firms then, and perhaps now as well, she was quite an anomaly and really left a legacy. Norma was a great personal friend of mine through a number of different channels. She had hired the two guys who eventually became my business partners back in 1984. And we had our firm together for 20 years until I left, and the two of them are still in business another 15 years later. And Norma ran an ARE coaching class for Black students who were preparing to take their licensing exam. And she used to boast that everyone she ever prepared passed. She had no failures, so that's on her ledger. But all of this stuff is happening kind of hidden in plain sight. So another part of the backdrop is what we were talking about a little while ago, which is this these policy conditions of the Federal Highways Act and urban renewal, which had the nickname of Negro removal. You see on the lower left what was the excavation for the I-375 freeway in Detroit, which is the project that I was sort of informally talking to you all about before we started to talk, where the Michigan Department of Transportation is now filling in what became a freeway cut with a surface boulevard condition to return it more to the scale of what you see above, which was Hastings Street then, before the freeway arrived. And the rationale used for this approach is captured in these three quotes that you see on the slide. Of course, there always had to be a rationale that was other than just blatant and overt destruction of communities. So now, for many of us who have been working and achieving and making things happen without a lot of recognition, just because we're, like all of us who enter this profession, are really driven by some crazy phenomenon that none of us understand. It makes us love this thing, architecture and design, and we do. We're going to find a way to practice it. But at the end of the day, who will tell the story of who we are, where we've been, and what we do? And post George Floyd, we are at a moment where Black people have been enabled with the agency to tell our own version of that story, to take the parallel histories and to merge them into one American history so that it can be full and truthful and enlightening and inspirational as well. So, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just give you a little update on where we are. We've been 2% of all licensed architects for 52 years. And that was, that marker of 52 years was set down by the civil rights leader, Whitney M. Young Jr., who addressed the AIA at a 1968 conference, where he said, most notably, that you are not a profession that has distinguished itself by your social and civic contributions to the cause of civil rights. You are most distinguished by your thunderous silence and your complete irrelevance. And that was aimed at the profession, which during a time where the needs of urban decay were so present and visible, that the fact that architects in general were chasing commissions for bright, shiny object buildings and not turning their gifts and talents to solving these urban problems were the motivation for his statement. And it was really at that point that NOMA was formed, because there were probably, I don't know how many Black architects attended that Whitney Young convention, but 12 of them actually got together and said, he's right, we got to deal with this. And so NOMA was born and has been ever since, addressing these issues, along with a growing number of all of our colleagues now that are enjoined in this fight. So latest statistics, this needle's not ticking up fast enough to make the AIA's 2030 commitment happen quite yet, but we are cultivating the pipeline quite a bit. And I'm really excited to see the curve that Black women are having in their licensure right now. They are, every day I go to the website, there's another member there. And so the numbers are ticking up. You have to ask the question, and we all have to ask this of ourselves as we prepare for this profession, yeah, it's one thing to be a complete believer in the value of what we do and the beauty of design and what we do and our desire to put it out there. The other side of the coin, which, you know, unfortunately for many emerging and young professionals is discovered through blood, sweat, and tears, is how kind is this profession back to us? You know, what if it's not a monetary attraction, you know, what can the profession do to sustain us so that we won't leave it? And that's a big question right now because young people have a lot of different options. The skill set that you attain in architecture school is applicable to so many other things that pay so much better, especially, you know, my firm in 1995, we got raped by Disney. They stole 6 of our people in a 6-month period. And you know, and that just wrecked our business plan at that point. So we had to completely recalibrate what we wanted to be in the future and went from aspiring to be a 100-person firm to being more like a 15-person firm that had control over what we did, you know. So a lot of different things go into this dynamic. But I think what's critical and what's been recognized is that there is a newly appreciated value in diversity, not only of ethnicity and race, but of thought and lived experience as it's able to contribute to a design process. So now I'll just share with you some of my colleagues, some of who I know very well and others who I've just recently been discovering as ZGF has accepted my challenge to discover these Black-owned firms across the country and reach out to them, not around a project opportunity, not because we need them to fulfill an MWBE requirement, but to show genuine interest in what they've been able to do and what they are planning to do in the future. And Michael Marshall is a great example of one of our best practitioners in Washington, D.C., whose body of work is pretty incredible and who has a very rich story in his history. On the other side is a sort of brand new, newly baked architect, Miss Cook John, who stood up her own firm very courageously. And this is like, okay, you got to take what you can get in a way as far as clients are concerned and projects. You don't have to take everything that's offered to you. And I posit to say that you have to have an ethical, moral red line that you won't cross. No matter how desperate you may feel, no matter how much you think you need a commission, if it does not meet your ethical and moral standards or your design ethos, then you have to have the courage to say, you know, thanks, but no thanks. There's probably somebody down the block that'll do that for you the way you want it. Jack is a great friend of mine. He is the author of what are called the 10 Principles of Afrocentric Design, which dives into how culture is expressed through architecture and design. And those principles are potentially applicable to any culture that has a set of values that it lives by that are expressed in the built environment, in their own native built environment. And in this case, Jack has worked on the lower right with architect Frederick Fisher in New York to do the facade design of the Kalahari apartments in Harlem. Obviously, Harlem is a largely Black enclave, and these are kente patterns from West Africa that have been sort of rationalized through computational design so that the laying of the brick worked out perfectly and the patterns were realized without a flaw. On the upper center slide is Harlem Hospital, where HOK reached out to Jack to be the kind of cultural design consultant, and they were able to take WPA era murals from the walls within the Harlem Hospital, have them replicated at this large scale and used as facade elements behind the glazing. That projects out and reflects back to that community things that are uplifting and positive representations of that culture. The center is the bedroom he did for his daughter, Sojourner, which puts on display elements of the culture that he preaches and teaches to her so that she has constant reminders of history beyond what we are typically taught in school. And then, you know, as an abstract theoretician and an academic, Jack produces work like you see in the bottom center slide, which was a theoretical sort of, if James Baldwin, the author, had a Philip Johnson glass house type project, what would it be? And this was the outcome of that one. Now, the next two that I'm going to, well, not the next two, but yeah, Terry Canada and Victor Vines. So these two came up under the wing of architect Phil Freelon, and I would hope that his name would be familiar, but if it's not, Phil just passed away 2 years ago, much too young, succumbed to Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. But before he passed away, he created this incredible legacy of buildings, many of which are cultural institutions, many of them centered around Black experience, so that they are modernist and abstract, but contain the soul and spirit of African and African-American culture. And he's found ways to express that. And these two people, Terry and Victor, had left, well, Perkins and Will bought Phil's firm about 8 years ago and merged his brand into theirs. And then when he got sick and was on his way out, you know, two of his disciples stood up their own firms in the Durham, North Carolina area. And Terry is one, and she's having some degree of success, but her projects are still modest in size and scale. Victor, on the other hand, has been able to land some commissions like this library you see in the center upper slide, which has already won significant awards from both AIA and NOMA. And he's on a tear. So he's just going to be a force to be reckoned with as he continues to mature and his practice continues to mature. Damaris Hollingsworth, had a long conversation with her on Monday. She's Brazilian. She aspired to attend college in the States, and she ended up getting a full ride with housing and other support costs from Arizona State. One of the prerequisites to be a recipient was that you had to speak English. She spoke not a word of English. She bluffed her way in, got the full ride, showed up in Phoenix area, was put into a house with 4 other Brazilian students, not architecture students, just Brazilian students. And they refused to speak Portuguese while she was there, forcing her to learn the language. In like 3 months she was speaking. So it's pretty incredible. And she was very successful in her education, and then worked for a local firm for about 10 years, the first 7 of which was in the Phoenix office. And then they moved her to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where she is now, right at the epicenter of the George Floyd stuff. And she stood up her own practice there 2 years ago, and was struggling. Hear this now. I want you to hear and understand this. She was struggling to turn potential clients into real clients and real work. The day after George Floyd was murdered, her phone started ringing and it hasn't stopped ringing yet since. And that is what my colleagues, my Black colleagues, are reporting, that everyone's being seen now and everyone's being approached. And it's like if we were traded on the stock market, we'd be the hottest commodity ever to show up. But with it or without it, this drive, this commitment to make our mark in the built environment is just so powerful. And I'm, incredibly gratified to see work coming out of my friends and colleagues. This couple, found them. His name is General Judd and his wife, Christina. They come out of the film industry. They're not formally trained as architects. They're not licensed, but they've managed to, at the encouragement of their kind of Hollywood clients or whatever, stand up a design practice. They do a lot of partnering, especially, of course, to take care of the documents, but they have a design philosophy that sort of echoes their approach to film in terms of storytelling and in terms of cinematography and imagining kind of views. And whatever they're doing, it's working because they have plenty of work. And so, these are firms that my company, which we bring a partner onto the calls just to get to hear their stories, to get to know who they are with no project pressure in mind, to share our story, and then to have a regular base touch so that we build that relationship over time. And then eventually, what we're doing is we're finding that even on projects where there's no requirement for an MWB, minority woman-owned business, whatever, we're partnering with these firms because they're bringing such a wealth of diversity of thought and approach. And we're coming up with some really successful projects. Dina needs no help. She's got a firm in Chicago called Interactive. The project you see her standing in front of is the Chicago Art Institute that she worked with Renzo Piano on the addition to, which is just a gorgeous piece of architecture. And she is most recently engaged as the associate architect with Todd Williams and Billy Chen on the Obama Presidential Library in Chicago. So she's a force of nature. And again, it's like all of a sudden, one day you don't see her, and the next day, whoa, you see her, and there she's there, and look at all this stuff. And so this surprise of the work. And lastly, in terms of firms and firm models, I want to talk just a minute about the emergence of public interest design firms. Young people, your generation, those a little ahead of you and some coming behind you, are more socially conscious than we've seen since the 60s. And some have had the courage to say, I'm not going to practice in a traditional way. I'm going to stand up a firm capable of working for people in need and organizations in need, like nonprofits, to afford them design excellence like we would any corporate client, because everyone deserves good design. And on the left, Brian Lee, who has a firm in New Orleans called Colocate, is very socially active and an activist. And Brian has, in the wake of the George Floyd incident, stood up an organization called Designers Protest, or DAP. Every Monday, they have a large attendance of people, mostly young folks in the profession. They've organized into 4 buckets of direct action, and people have been able to assign themselves to whichever, meets their standard, and have been working to on things like monuments and monument removal or re-representation, reinterpretation, those kinds of things, but also just doing regular brick and mortar space for nonprofits that are in need, and getting paid mostly through philanthropy and grants. The king of that is Michael Murphy in the middle, and you all know Michael Murphy in Mass. I mean, he's become famous, and he was a student at Harvard when I was a Loeb Fellow, 2006, 2007. And I know during that time, he left school to go to Rwanda in Africa and do the Butaro Hospital that launched his public interest design firm career. And now he's doing amazing work all over the world with an office of probably 80 some odd people now, all doing work on behalf of nonprofits. And then most recently, Chris Locke on the right, Design and Color. He was a colleague at ZGF. He left because he didn't think the firm was moving fast enough in terms of social justice. So he's been sort of growing his own brand aside from going to work 9 to 5 every day for a firm that he moved into. Okay, so that's kind of that part. The context of, the commonality we all share across all cultural and racial lines about architecture and the need for it, the love of it, and the demand that it be responsive to all of our potential client types. Now I'm going to talk about how you apply that to a city. I started off when Whitney Young talked about not paying attention to decay in inner cities. Now, a lot of cities are paying attention to those deficits. Some of it is selfish because we are moving away from the suburban life. We're moving back into the cities, we're reclaiming them, and the unfortunate casualty is often that word you hear, gentrification. Well, gentrification is equivalent to investment, new investment coming into an area that's been disinvested in. It on its face is not bad. It is in fact necessary if we're going to move these places forward. The boogeyman and bad thing in all of this is displacement. That's the word. When investment happens, when all of a sudden sidewalks that have been broken in a neighborhood for 30 years start getting repaved and fixed, that's like the first signal to those residents that have weathered the really tough times that their neighborhood is about to be gentrified, that the rents are going to go up, and if they don't own, if they're renters, that they're going to get priced out. And that, of course, happens all over. The hard work in the comeback city in Detroit shows that political leadership at the very top is required or necessary to move all aspects of the system beneath it, on the public government side, on the private development side, to a place through policy that ensures that communities will not be devastated by new investment and erased. Now, I should say that if you happen to be a homeowner, the property values go up around you, you're going to be a beneficiary, except if you're a senior on a fixed income and all of a sudden property values go up and your property taxes go up, and all of a sudden you have no way to pay those, and oh, you're in foreclosure, you lose your home. So there are many structures that Mayor Duggan has put in place in Detroit to gird against that. And what we're seeing now is that new populations, code language for white people, moving into some of the neighborhoods, being able to develop relationships with those longstanding residents, being able to respect their histories and legacies and become part of something that will be richer in the future, as opposed to the pattern of the gentrification pattern where new people come in and they basically start a new historical clock running, so that 2 years from then, they're talking about things as though they were the original settlers of those neighborhoods in terms of the new things that have happened, with no regard, recognition, acknowledgement of all of that history, all that legacy that came before them. So there's a lot that goes into the community engagement process as we go through. And I'm going to just talk about how that manifests itself and how it has manifested itself in Detroit during my tenure there from March of 2016 to September of 2018. So when I first was asked to come join the planning department staff, I, like many who haven't been to Detroit, have seen the images that, and this is the poster child for Detroit's decline. At one point, this was the real center of the symbol of Detroit's greatness, the central station where people come and go every day, trains in and out, and commerce and culture is all happening here. And you see it here as a ruin. Well, I will say that Ford, right before I left in 2018, purchased this, and this will be the new autonomous vehicles headquarters for Ford Motor Company. And so this will bring back what was lost symbolically in terms of the city's potential and possibility moving forward. But these were images that were fed out through the media. But upon arrival, what a beautiful discovery. This is Eastern Market. This is one of the oldest working markets still left in the country. And on every Saturday morning, I like to say, everyone ever lost in the Bermuda Triangle shows up here to get their bacon and eggs and cauliflower and eggplant. It's just an amazing mix-up and mashup of people of all walks of life. But what they have in common is that they are Detroiters. Detroiters are fiercely proud of who they are, where they come from, and it allows for this rich exchange and interchange between people from very different walks of life. And it's not like they just walk past each other. There's dialogue, there's conversation while you're waiting for your plant or herb or whatever. And so this was my beautiful discovery, and I tried to be here every Saturday that I was able, and I'll be flying from LA to Detroit this Friday. So this coming Saturday morning, you'll see me in this picture. Once again, hey, this is what we see. Detroit's crumbling. Its neighborhoods that used to be full are full of missing teeth now. But wait, right behind that, you have on the left upper the Mies van der Rohe's Lafayette Towers that are the corollary to what you see on the lower right, which are the Mies van der Rohe Lafayette Park townhomes. What a beautiful community, very diverse in many ways, pastoral and gorgeous. On the upper right, just a typical Detroit neighborhood that has withstood the test of time and challenge. And people who, Detroit is an 80% Black city. So imagine that 80% of the people that open the front door of these places are people of color. And of course, down on the lower right, in downtown Detroit, we now have a light rail. It's modest. It runs all of 3.1 miles on a single street, but it has connected people to opportunity and shown the possibility of what could come in the future as Detroit continues to come back with Fortune 500 companies moving in, with a lot of startups taking affordable space and investing in it and creating like real kind of funky, kind of creative industry businesses. It's a rich, rich place. And so our mantra at the planning department is, we are planning to stay, so that people who really want to stay have a way to stay, and that it's a place that's welcoming to all of its residents and citizens. So a couple of the projects that I was, in charge of, where we hired consultants to execute the work. and where we as the planning department led the community engagement process, knowing that those consultants would do their work and then they would leave and we would remain. And so rather than being stuck with promises that somebody else made, we had to make our own promises, and then we had to be held accountable to keep them after the work was done. The East Riverfront, like rivers in other industrial, post-industrial cities, serve primarily as an industrial kind of offloading, onloading place for, you know, all kinds of dirty things, but it's now being reimagined as a major public asset. So SOM did a wonderful job, their Chicago office, on planning this. We wound up with a 22 million square feet of new development and renovation that would probably take place over a 20 to 30 year period. And we presented it to the mayor, and he was like, that's all well and good, but I only want you talking to the community about the things in this plan that are attainable within a 1 to 3 year period, because they won't remember after that you said that something would happen in year 10. They would hold you accountable and hold me accountable as mayor right after, say, the 3rd year. So what we did was we were able to distill these 4 strategies that we had resources and ability to execute. So parks and green open space, greenways, which are connections beyond the riverfront to other neighborhoods to allow them safe passage to the river, streetscapes within the district to bring them up to a level where commerce could, retail could survive and do well, and then development with city-owned parcels within the district that we could send out RFPs for development on. So first, in terms of development, you know, this exhibit shows what would have been possible before our plan, where development of this sort of scale could have encroached this close to the riverfront. And what you're seeing on the left is actually a part of the restoration that was completed of the habitat that used to exist there. And it's part of Rivard Plaza, which is a kind of a public node of amenity. But with our vision, we hold that development back on the right to where you see the sort of white boxes of development, and expand that natural environment to give the beauty of the nature of the public realm to the public in perpetuity. Here's one edge of that space that has not been developed because it corresponds to this old Uniroyal site where there's a lot of hazmat, hazardous materials, and they've been cleaning that site. And soon the Riverfront Conservancy will embark on a project that will extend the existing promenade in this fashion over that site, and, you know, be another leg of completing a long linear promenade along the Detroit River. Here are the existing conditions of these, what were greenways built in the 1970s as a give back to the Black community by the first Black mayor to be elected in Detroit, Mayor Coleman Young. He was mayor for like 30 years. He had good juju in the beginning, but then he kind of became corrupt toward the end of his reign. And these were these you know, bucolic pathways that technically were supposed to lead to the river. They've fallen into disrepair. Part of our project is to restore them and make them ped and bike friendly. We position these red stanchions every 500 feet so that if you run into any kind of issue, you can call. And the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy operates a security team that on bicycle that can get to pretty much any of these spaces within 5 minutes. Detroit at its peak was over 1.5 million residents, and the city was designed and conceived of with these major wide spoke streets. This is Jefferson, which runs east-west parallel with the Detroit River. It's the first major spoke street. But emanating from that, there's Woodward Avenue, which is a north street, which you saw the light rail on before. And then there's Michigan Avenue and it slips my mind, brain fart on the other diagonal street. But these were conceived of as the motor city and giving deference to the car. And now with a population of just over, 600,000 people, those roads are way oversized. Plus 30% of residents of the motor city actually don't own cars, and they need ways to get around. So we introduced a very extensive bike network plan that typically will park the cars out into the street area and form the protection for the bike lane, which hugs the curb. Of course, a lot of older Detroit residents were in opposition to this. So we installed it first as a temporary sort of pop-up let it run for a couple of years, see how see how it played, and then make it permanent. So I believe that it's on the city, in the city's budget, to go ahead and make these improvements permanent, and they are being very heavily used. Now, this is really exciting because this now talks about the development in that district of the riverfront and city-owned property, and what it can do to stimulate private development alongside of it. So here we want to really make that edge, that street, Atwater, which we are pulling all development back to, right for mixed-use development and appreciation and use of the riverfront as a public asset. Deeper into the district, where you have this funky industrial fabric, Detroit is about authenticity, as are many places. And so how can we imagine densifying this neighborhood so that it makes economic sense, but in a way that preserves and more or less celebrates its industrial character and nature? So, to help developers wrap their heads around the possibilities, obviously we introduced some visions and some outcomes that really got us excited, and I think they got the development community excited as well. So there are a number of projects that are underway now on the publicly owned property along the riverfront. And all in all, this is kind of what the final big reveal was, which we never got to really share with the public. You see along the river edge, mostly green space preserved for the public good. You see those green pathways feeding up north into neighborhoods. And I say up north, it's really interesting. The way the geography is, the thumb of Michigan, Detroit is actually north of Canada across the river. So we looked south to Canada across the Detroit River, kind of counterintuitive, just a little interesting factoid. All right, Detroit, Motown, right? So Motown has been these two little houses for all this time, Hitsville, and a number of tourists, in particular Japanese folks, who arrive in huge busloads and get off and just stampede through. Those places are literally falling apart. So Motown has been raising privately funds, $50 million, to build a new Motown museum behind the existing homes, renovate them, but restrict access to them to some degree, and really take advantage of the economic engine that this represents for the city. Another major public project that happened during my tenure was the construction of Little Caesars Arena for the Detroit Red Wings hockey team. And this was an interesting urban arena. It's sunken into the ground so much so that it doesn't impose itself on the surrounding otherwise commercial urban context. And what's really funny about this project was that they had an end date they had to finish by, because they had booked Kid Rock, who's from Detroit, to do a big concert in the arena on a certain date. So 90 days before that date, me and some of the city mucky mucks got a tour through the construction to see how things were progressing. When we got down to the lower level where the locker rooms and everything was, we noticed that they were putting in like finished lockers and furniture and stuff, but that they had knocked out a lot of the heads over the door openings, and a lot of concrete block, and they, chip that stuff away. And we're like, well, what's going on here? And they said, oh yeah, well, we just signed a deal with the Detroit Pistons basketball team, and now we have to make all the door openings another foot higher for all the basketball players. So it was really funny, but they were able to get it done, and everything took off right. And so this is an engine for public realm excitement and bringing people back. And there's a lot of housing. You see it suggested on the left in terms of rehab housing and new construction that accompanies this type of vision. And there's a 50-block District Detroit vision that's been crafted by the owners of the sports teams, the Ilitch family, that own the Pistons and the Red Wings. Okay. Another big project where the planning department took a slightly different approach was, when other cities were getting this sort of urban mixed-use housing, 4 or 5 stories, stick-built over a deck of concrete for parking, Detroit missed all of that. There just wasn't any investment going on. So now there's a big push to densify the city, to fill in those missing teeth. That shot that I showed in the beginning, where I showed all the missing teeth, that's this neighborhood called Brush Park. So we at the planning department developed a form-based code really in cooperation with Dan Gilbert, who's the king of Quicken Loans, who was the first one to really put his money where his mouth was in downtown Detroit and has spurred a lot of this redevelopment. And Gilbert had hired 5 different architectural firms to design portions of this neighborhood development. And we applied for a HUD choice grant to fund this project. We were denied on a technicality, and then Gilbert said, screw it, I'll do it with my own money. And so this is now being built out according to a form-based code, and it brings a lot of best practices to the community, to the neighborhood. And these are just a few exhibits of how that played out, and some of the visions for the architecture that is now backfilling that missing middle. This one is, I think, by Lorcan O'Hurley, Loha, and it's actually modular. They trucked in the modules and been assembling them and finishing it out with in-place construction. So, you know, I'm not saying this is great architecture. It's more about neighborhood fabric at this point and densification and providing enough amenity, but also enough familiarity so that people who once lived here, who want to continue to live here, feel welcome here. So what does that translate to? That translates to our operational mantra of respect. Aretha laid it out, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. And so, you know, we have respect for these things, for nature. And some of these things you don't, in the way media projects who we are as a society, you often don't see you know, a Black person just standing appreciating azaleas in nature. You don't see a brother with a camera photographing butterflies in a garden. You don't see, you know, Black people riding bicycles. There's these myths. Black people don't ride bikes. They don't swim. No, we do, all of that. We certainly have a large respect for history in that city. It's such great architecture. Albert Kahn, you know, I mean, great architects there. Grassroots, gritty people who are gonna make it. They're gonna just take their shot, you know, entrepreneurs, and we have to respect that and support that. A great respect for work, you know, a lot of unemployment. So how do we put people to work? And this slide shows the greening of Detroit, which trains returning citizens, formerly incarcerated people, for how to be landscape stewards in the same neighborhoods that they were doing harm to years before. And, you know, one of these guys who couldn't complete the program, who came to the graduation ceremony to see his mates get their certificates, was actually held to the last. The director had one certificate left, and he turned to this young man and he says, you know, you have a job. We understand you had personal circumstances. We want you to be part of this. Here's your thing. And this guy who's like a former gangbanger just started crying. I mean, you know, this is human stuff. This is where the rubber hits the road. It's really amazing. Nothing about us without us is for us. Proverb says it's South African. I've heard it's Jewish. I've heard it's everyone under the sun wants to claim this, but it has resonance. Nothing about us without us is for us. And therefore, we have to have community voices in the conversation about what needs to happen, what wants to be. And to that end, during my tenure at the planning department, I also taught at Michigan, I mentioned earlier, and a seminar course in the fall, and then a design studio in the winter. In my seminar, I asked them, well, what do you want me to teach? And they said, oh, you have to tell us. So I created a class called Designing with Community, specifically to give students an opportunity to understand the necessity for meaningful community engagement, not just something you check the box that you've done, but something that has to be measured by your results. And to you know, start to train your generation of how you're going to operate moving forward, going into the future. So there you are, and there's a saying, and I want to leave you with that saying, nothing about us without us is for us. To think deeply about that as you go forward and you do your work. So we citizen architects, too often hidden in plain sight, we need to claim our territory, claim who we are. And yes, I took this photograph of a flower show in Eastern Market in Detroit, made it black and white. Now I love it. That's the story, that's the show.
Well, nothing about us without us is for us. That is a very strong statement. Thank you. Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, take advantage of me because I'm a talkative guy. I want to hear from y'all.
Thank you, Stephen, so much. Hans Blitzer, Dean of the Gibbs College. I'm thrilled to have you here. And so I do, you touched on a number of issues that I think are really relevant for students, but also for faculty, right? We are the mentors, right? We are the guides. Our job is to inspire and to put wind in the student sails. So how, based on your experiences so far, what is it that we can do as faculty to help the students recognize that their sense of agency is far greater than just simply, I can do this cool rendering, or I have, this ability to do this building has a really cool shape that's going to show up in a photograph, right? And specifically, the question is a little bit more about what is it that they should know about policy and funding in order to grow their agency?
That's a great question, Hans, because without, the golden rule, he who has the gold makes the rules. Without the gold, you can't make the rules. So,
Yes.
We just had my AIA chapter here had a session on architect as developer. So that's one way. It's not rocket science, actually, and we are capable, and friends of mine, I wish I could say it was me, but they become wealthy, relatively speaking, by just doing modest projects, and they get to design them the way they want, But I think the way that that path can be presented to students by faculty is through some research into projects and clients, entities that are doing projects that do well financially, but do good socially, right? And so one of our clients at ZGF, we've worked with for here over 20 years, is a group called Wexford Sciences. And Wexford partners with a university. They come in to Norman and they say, okay, Oklahoma, we want the research arm of your university that's committed to alternative energy to partner with us. We're going to build a building that's going to house some of your functions. It's going to take a corporate or government, like Department of Energy tenant, and we're going to put a high school in it as well. And we're going to create a complete pathway for education to training to employment, all in one package. So they've been successfully doing that model, and we've been very, fortunate and honored to design a number of these projects with them. So I'm right now trying to pull a deal together with them and one of the Michigan universities to go into a site that was an abandoned hospital campus that was such a major institution in its heyday that our architecture is completely, I call it Gotham. It's this sort of neo-Gothic brick, beautiful. You couldn't build it that way today. And any, sort of corporate organization could move into there and have a hell of a campus, and it's surrounded by a neighborhood that has affordable homes, So anyway, I think a lot of it is just understanding that these pathways, these options are out there. It's really trying to achieve the intersection between one's personal kind of values and aspirations with what a client's mission is, with what the financing allows to happen, and to the extent that we can offer, hey, I'm the lowly architect. I'm sending emails to the two Wexford client guys saying, hey, I got a potential deal for you, I mean, if I can cash in some of my chips to make that kind of a thing happen at this point in my life, that's legacy right there. So I think that there's a good body of work that's underway out there to point the students to, and set them on some research paths that can come back and inform faculty and administration in ways that excite and wake y'all up, so.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to definitely look into the Wexford Sciences as well. Sounds a provocative type of partner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
So the urban design studio you were teaching at Michigan, what kind of students did you have?
I was graduate students. There were, I would say, probably 1/3 were foreign nationals who were attending the school. So we had some language, issues to communicate concepts and whatnot. they were, you know, my approach to bringing a real project from the city of Detroit into the studio was interesting, because one of my teams came up with a scheme for the restoring the boulevard that once was Hastings Street, the epicenter of Black commerce and culture that was erased by the I-375 freeway, bringing that back. And the subtext of the studio abstract was choosing sides. You build this boulevard back, and now you have developable land on either side, or you favor one side with the boulevard, and you create developable land on the other side. And I had a team. There were 2-person teams, and I had a Black kid and a Chinese young lady on a team, and they were sort of at face value the most unlikely team, but they produced the craziest and best project. And they said, to hell with choosing sides. We're going to run this thing right up the center, and we're going to meander it. And what that did, it created a great deal of interest, because it took traffic off of a 65 mile per hour freeway and found a way to slow it down naturally. It created view corridors along the meander that you wouldn't have had coming straight in. And it provided more intimate pockets for development as it meandered its way through. So I went to the real project meeting on that project with the Michigan Department of Transportation. And I said, well, let me just share a little something that my students are doing, you might find interesting. And I showed them the work, and you guys could be real hopeful about this. The very next day when I went into the office, I was walking by the fax machine, and I happened to look over, and I saw this thing that looked really familiar. And the Michigan Department of Transportation engineers had taken that scheme, and they had done a version of it and sent it over to the planning department office like overnight, so there's the ability to impact, public work. So that was, I don't have a PhD, and quite frankly, I may have a Loeb Fellowship certificate, but I don't have a master's. So coming into a University of Michigan Taubman School and garnering the respect of my peers, I had to earn that, and I did it because my goal was not about me at all. It was all about the students. And I constructed my curriculum and my pedagogy around how best to equip and communicate things to them that will be of use, so that they could become servants in this profession and do good.
Good.
Yeah. Well, Stephen, I'm going to come back and ask you a different type of question here, coming back to your experiences in planning there. And this one is about public participation and engagement, right? We know that, there's a lot of research out there. One of our faculty in planning in particular who writes on this as it relates especially to Asian American communities, there's often kind of a fear or cynicism about joining into kind of these public participation efforts, whether it's for, signing up for the census, or, there's a community project, or there's a project going to happen in your community. Let's see how we can shape it, right? What did you see in your experiences so far that helped build confidence in the public participation process? Because again, as an architect, we're not trained in this arena, and yet we don't realize that if nobody's listening, our work is worthless, right? Yeah. And it behooves us to think through how do we bring more to the table to listen and engage and allow us to do better, more meaningful work.
Yeah, beautiful question. I mean, in some cases, it involves we as the architects, as we're studying a site, as we're looking at a potential, that we go further and meet neighbors, whether it's in a commercial district and you're meeting the other shop owners or property owners, or it's in a neighborhood and you're meeting neighboring residents, and start to understand who the leaders are in those communities. Often could be religious leaders, could be churches that are good institutions within neighborhoods. But you find out who the voices are that are respected already, and you find out how to recruit them into your process. A Loeb classmate of mine, Damon Rich, who after the Loeb Fellowship went to work in the city of Newark and became the planning director there, and then launched his own practice called Hector, Damon was hired by the city of Detroit to do a neighborhood framework plan. And to address that issue, they recruited a dozen high school students who lived in the neighborhood, trained them, and then equipped them to literally run the community outreach meetings. So we'd give them the presentation boards. We would talk with them until they understood what needed to be communicated. And then guess what? All of the neighbors said, oh, our kids are doing this, and they all came out. And not a perfect approach, but one that I have great admiration for because it's a courageous approach, and one that I think we're going to utilize in the appropriate setting. So it does involve authenticity of voice, and you don't have that when you're coming into an outside situation. So you have to cultivate it and find it, and then involve it and incorporate it in a way that seems very natural and very not forced, not preconceived. That is the other risk, that by truly living into that phrase of nothing about us without us is for us, you know, you could come up with the best thing you've ever done and throw it out there. And if the community's like, that's not for us, and they can articulate why, you know, what are you gonna do with that? So there's risk that our best ideas and best thinking may miss something that could have made it both and. And that, I think, is the goal, because we don't want to dumb down what we want to do. We also want to believe that everyone, regardless of economic stature or social circumstance, deserves great design, and that great design doesn't mean expensive design. It just means great design. You know, give us a problem, right? Put constraints on it. What are you going to do? You're going to solve it. You know, so we take that mentality, and you have the courage to, you know, try to interpret what you're feeling and hearing and seeing, and have something beyond that satisfies those things, but goes beyond what the average person could have imagined, because that's what we do, you know. So
thank you.
Yeah.
I had a question real fast, and you kind of touched on high school students, and it kind of got me thinking. You know, architectural education right now, it seems like it's, you know, primarily taught in university settings, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are in engaging in communities in kind of putting architectural education in K through 12 programs, so it gives younger students not only the exposure to you know, architecture, but even design. So can you talk maybe a little, do you have any experience with younger students or younger generations and teaching design and architecture?
Absolutely. One of the things I'm most proud of is during my NOMA presidency, 2009, 2010, I really amplified our project pipeline initiative, which is in most cases, a summer camp for middle school kids mostly, but we'll take some high school kids if they're really interested. That is occurring in about 12 to 14 of the cities around the country that have NOMA chapters. And we have been, like, the first year we did it in LA about 11, 12 years ago, we had maybe 15 young people show up. And now we have over 100 every year that come. So we are doing our part as NOMA. ACE Mentoring is doing their part, you know, to try to introduce young people to it. But to your other point, I really, really agree that if some level of design, whether it's architecture or just design as a philosophy, could be introduced into the curriculum, just the way art used to be, or maybe those are merged, or physical education or music, the things that make us human, you know, that would go a long way to introducing a lot of people to architecture as a profession that would otherwise not have any knowledge of it, you know. So I do, but I'm very committed to the pipeline from the middle school age right up through the top of the pipeline where I'm at right now, because, you know, I still have places I can grow within my firm, and they better take notice of that soon. No, just kidding. But so yeah, I have an intern who I managed to corral for the summer who's going to work with me on the other thing is what kind of projects can you bring in and can you have that, I've been working with a group down in Anniston, Alabama on something called the Freedom Riders Training Institute. And the Freedom Rides happened 60 years ago in May, it'll be 60 years, where these black and white civil rights protesters got on these buses and tried to go to Montgomery, Alabama. And one of those buses pulled into the bus terminal in Anniston, Alabama, and was attacked. And then the driver pulled out and started driving, and he got about 2 miles up the highway, and the bus kind of broke down, at which point a mob jumped out of their cars and literally firebombed the bus. And there are well-documented photographs of people, kind of coming out of the bus. And this little white girl who's a neighbor there was giving a glass of water to one of these people with the fire burning behind him. And it's like an iconic photograph. So they're standing up in Training Institute to use the 6 fundamental principles that Dr. King used in nonviolent protest in the 60s and how that could play out today. And the training is for both law enforcement and protest community to talk about how to do this in a way that observes our legal rights to do so without, going overboard and violating them and resulting in violence. Big, tall order right now, but we've been given a physical home for the Institute, which happens to be right across the street from that bus station that's now on the National Register of Historic Places. My firm is giving a pro bono service to look at the potential of making that an entire district, historic district, because of the locations and events, and to develop this Training Institute building as an adaptive reuse, which interestingly, there's a brand new federal courthouse that is almost complete construction just a block away. So there's a lot of synergy there. This young man who started in the NOMA summer camp, who's now a student at Woodbury University in Southern California, has become a leader among his peers, and he's going to have this experience to anchor himself as he decides how he wants to practice going forward. So yeah. But each of us can have one of those people in our lives that we're talking to, that we are helping, but find out how much they are actually helping us. And that's the beautiful discovery there.
Yeah, that's great. And it also kind of speaks to your point about citizen architect. I know you mentioned that you classify yourself as a citizen architect. So in turn, you're sort of mentoring these young students that then they will become citizen architects and hopefully will pass that along. It's great. It's fantastic.
Thanks. Thanks. Well, no one's sleeping, but there's some half-mast eyes going on out there. I don't know. It's getting late back there, huh?
I thought you had a meeting.
I do. As soon as you're willing to cut me loose, I'm going to jump into that other one.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. I have a question. It doesn't relate to your presentation. It relates to your background of you that I really like the structure and the facade. Just wondering what it is, where it is.
Behind me.
Yes, yes.
So little did I know this would end up being one of my best Zoom backgrounds, but I took this picture a couple of years ago when I led a group of my ZGF colleagues on a tour of what was then the recently completed federal courthouse building in downtown Los Angeles, designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. And I concluded after that visit that there was no shade of white that SOM doesn't love, because everything is one shade of white or another, but it's a beautiful building. And this is a view afforded to every level, and this is on the upper level, looking to the east in downtown LA.
Okay, nice, very nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the great presentation and informative.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thanks. It's been a privilege to be with you guys again. I feel like I'm, part of the adjunct faculty now. This is my 3rd rodeo with you guys in this year, so it's good.
We'll take you whenever we can have you.
Yeah. And I did see the work that Dave's students are doing on their mixed use project in downtown, and I think that's really admirable work. And it has the potential to incorporate some of these ideas of weaving into a neighborhood as something different that has things about its soul that make them related. So that's the challenge.
Thank you. We're excited about it.
All right. Well,
Okay.
I'm only as far away.
Yeah, I know. You're easy to get a hold of. Appreciate it.
All right. Cheers.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, David. That was great. Thanks a
thank you,
lot.
Sheeta. Yeah, he's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, very
He's
much,
really smart and really caring and really centered.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Thank
you so much. Thanks a lot. And I was wondering, yeah, Sean send us a link, but I couldn't. Okay, I can get it. Okay.
It's for a conference they're having.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in May. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. You have a
Thank
good day. Take care.
You too. See ya.